Good
Yeah.
afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our session this afternoon. The session entitled Designing Our Future, Celebrating Our Past. And what we're wanting to do today is to reflect on our heritages and where we come from. And within those, go and look at what are those valuable things that we can bring into designing a truly inclusive society. If we think of the origin of a profession like ours, it is steeped very much in Western ideas and norms and standards. And as it develops, that becomes normalized as part of the profession. And I think to create and construct a truly inclusive society, we have to go back and question and look at some of the things that we've come to accept as normal, as being professional, if I can put it that way. And yet there's so much in the richness of our South African heritage and the diverse cultures that are part of it that can really be used to create a space that is truly inclusive for all and in which everyone can belong. And that is our focus for today. So if we go and look at our speakers this afternoon, we'll start with Tandiwe Gama, then Andrew Johnson, Yasmin Ibrahim, and then myself, and then we'll open for questions and discussions. I've asked each speaker to prepare more or less 10 minutes. Some will be a little more, some will be a little bit less. And thereafter we'll open it to the floor. Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to this time that we're going to share. Tandiwe, I'm going to give over to you. You can take it away. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon to the people that have joined today. We're hoping that some more people will join. But yes, as Anne has indicated, today is basically about us reflecting on our cultures, on our heritage, but it's also about us within the ambits of SIOPSA to look at what does this mean for us. So without going into detail, let me just share the slides that I've prepared for you, colleagues. I wanted to today just dwell a little bit on, yes, we're talking heritage, we're talking culture, but look at it from the perspectives of identity and the perspective of what it means to the legacy that gets created, or the legacy that is associated with certain cultural backgrounds and so forth. So when I looked at the concept of identity, just on a high level, our identity speaks to our background, our roots and our heritage. When we talk about background, roots and heritage, we're basically talking about who are you, your family name. And in our African culture, we have clan names as well. Like for instance, myself, I am a Gama. The Gamas' clan name is Mlambo. You have the Ndlovus in African culture that are known, for instance, as Ogajeni. So those are some of the clan names that basically tells your family name and your history, because there's different histories related to the different clans within the African cultures. And when we're speaking about culture, basically we're talking about just your customs, your traditions, your artifacts, your clothing, which I think has very largely gotten to be associated with, our clothes associated with certain cultural groups, certain traditions, and certain clans, like I indicated, and that speaks to who you are as a person. The teachings that come with that cultural background as well. So when we're talking culture, we basically, it's a whole rounded of who you are and how, what are the teachings that you have learned, who you are in terms of your customs and your traditions and your values as well. Values speak a lot into the cultural background. In terms of the language as well and the representation, I thought one of the things about South African is that we know we are known as a rainbow nation that have 11, if not 12 different languages. But all of those languages speak to indicate who we are in terms of our background, our heritage, our roots, and so forth. But when we speak of identity, because we are people whose lives do not necessarily end with our cultural backgrounds and who we are in terms of our family names, but it also speaks to who we are in other social networks, in other social settings, like for instance, our workplaces and so forth. So I thought, let me also just bring in the element to say, there are other social networks and groupings that basically we tend to identify with, like in our case as professionals. We are IOPs, so that professional identity speaks to us as a profession. Recreationally, who are you? It also tends to identify you as who are you? And for instance, are you a musician? Are you a soccer player? So recreationally, there's also that identity that sort of speaks to who you are as a person. Your religion is a very big one. Your religion as well. How does your religion define or identify who you are? The country of your origin. Who do you represent in terms of other things like your sexuality, for instance, but that's, you know, in our language, they say asikolapo. So I'm not there, but I'm just indicating that also speaks to your identity. So when you look at the concept of identity, it's basically looking at who and what you identify as, whether in terms of your background, also in terms of your other aspects of your life, such as your social networks and your other groupings. And all of that speaks to the concept of belonging, of meaning, of teachings, and of legacy, which I will elaborate a little bit on. So basically in this slide, what I'm trying to say is that we can agree that our identity or what shapes our identity is how we live our lives, what gives us meaning, our teachings, our heritage, our growth, and our pride. We can move to the next slide. Colleagues, in this slide, I just wanted to talk a little bit on the African or the ethnic cultures that we've gotten to associate with a lot of vibrancy in our African settings. I mean, most of the African or ethnic cultures in South Africa are known to be vibrant in colors, in terms of the beadwork, in terms of the handwork, artistic, music and so forth, the food. And in this slide, I just tried to identify, there's quite many traditions in South Africa, so I could not have put all of them there, but just to try and identify some of the African cultures and bring out the vibrancy in them. And again, speak to the concept of identity and the legacy. So I thought, because I only have 10 minutes, I can't speak to all of them. I thought I'll just nitpick a few just to also bring out the concept. And I thought, let me also mention the Zulus. And Zulus, basically because we all know that we today celebrate Heritage Day, but historically this day was known as the Shaka Day. So, and the Shaka, we know, is the king of the Zulu, so I could not have left out the Zulu nation. But again, when you speak of identity, how you identify the Zulu nation, you look at some of the, I think it's the bottom two pictures where there are two, male and a female in that picture there, where I basically try to identify the attire that speaks to the Zulu culture. And they are known for their animal-based, their attires basically the skins of the animals, the feathers, and their whole image is leather-based, whether we're talking about their spears or their beadwork and so forth. When we look at the Ndebeles, for instance, I've got also a Ndebele picture there of Mama Esther Mahlangu, whom we all know, I suppose. Ndebeles are known for their artistry and their geometric expressions, basically. Ndebeles are big in painting, and their homes are painted, and they're very colorful people. So that is, again, it speaks to the legacy that they have. This is their legacy. And we all know, like I said, Mama Esther Mahlangu, I think she's been honored with an honorary doctorate, I think in the last couple of years, because of her work. And this is the legacy that represents the Ndebele nation. I'll speak about Basotho. Basotho, again, if you know Basotho, you know them through their signature blanket that is known as Morokotlo in Sotho. But that's basically their attires. You identify Mosotho through their blankets that they wear and the shweshwe material that they use for their females, most of them. So that again speaks to the legacy and the image and the identity of the Basotho. And of course, I had to throw in the Swazi because Thandiwe is a Swati girl. Thandiwe represents the Swati nation in the different African cultures. And what is the signature image on the brand, so to speak, or the legacy of the Swazis? Swazis are known by amabai. Amabai is basically what I'm wearing. I don't know if you can see this. This is ibai. Basically, it's like your wrap around. Swazis, this is their image. This is their identity, so to speak. But when we speak of legacy, I thought, let me also just mention that in terms of the African culture, the colors are there to represent, the vibrancy is there. And even our jewelry, most of us, obviously, the African cultures accessorize. They don't get shy with accessories and so forth. And when we speak of legacy, I thought, let me also throw in the traditional reed dance that we all know as Umhlanga. That's the biggest legacy of, for instance, the Zulus and the Swazis. Guys, this is just me just trying to highlight the concept of identity, the concept of legacy and the meaning or tradition, so to speak, in an African culture. And I thought maybe whilst I do that, let me also introduce to you in an African way who Thandiwe is and introduce myself to you guys. And I thought, I know some of us will probably not hear this, but bear with me. This is me coming as raw and as African as I can in my language. Who is Thandiwe? UThandiwe inkosazana yakwagama, ogama igegete zamalambo. Oba nomlambo na, omlambo bayaziwa bakagama. Umlambo ongawelwa, owelwa inkalakala kuphela. Kungani na, kungoba inkalakala zona zihamba lukeke. Ogama ombokazi, omlangeni. UThandiwe futhi uzalwa intombi yakwaKhumalo. Obani oKhumalo na? OKhumalo amantungwa, ombulazi, umbulazi omnyama, omashobane, owaphuza ikhamba lomuntu waliqeda, emyenga ngendaba. I'll leave it at that, girls. That was Thandiwe just introducing myself. And I know there's no translation for our clan names. Okay, we can move to the last slide. This last slide, just to go back to the topic that and design for us. The topic reads as follows: designing the future and celebrating the past. And I thought I'll end my presentation by just throwing in a couple of questions in this regard, and maybe ask these questions. Some of them we can, it's questions we can maybe even discuss in this group, but maybe in future. But I thought, let me just throw in these 3 questions. They read as follows: what dialogues should we as SIOPSA be having in order to create the richness in our understanding of who we are in our diversity? How can we, that is SIOPSA, contribute to enriching our unity in diversity, our sense of identity and belonging? And how can we make the richness of our diversity work for SIOPSA and create a legacy that SIOPSA or we can be proud of? So those are the questions I thought, let me just throw out there. They don't have to be answered today, but these are questions that are out there that we can deliberate as and when time fits. And in terms of the recommendations, I thought maybe let me just throw in my 2 cents worth of what I think we should be considering And I thought maybe it's one of the things or three things that I mentioned, inclusively and deliberately, and highlight the words inclusively and deliberately. Try to normalize open dialogues regarding concepts such as belonging, such as unity, exclusion, and so forth. Intentionally try to celebrate diversity and celebrate everyone, big and small, within the fraternity of SIOPSA. And also just to make an intentional and a conscious, sustained effort to make all of us, as in underlined, all of us feel that they belong to this organization. So this is where I end it, guys. As Tata Madiba would say it, I thank you.
Thanks so much, Thandiwe. I got goose flesh when you were introducing yourself. I'd love to understand all that you said one day.
Yeah.
So we'll have to have coffee and you can explain it to me because I think it would be very valuable.
Staring of me, but I know you can't translate. But in short, these are our sort of clan names that sort of tells a bit of our history and our identity. When we say Ogama Umlambo, Umlambo, just briefly, and Umlambo is like your river, a very gigantic river that you can never cross. And saying this is the clan of the Gamas, they represent that river that you can never cross. It's deep to understand, but it's there, you know.
That's it's actually amazing. It's so profound that we actually, you know, it almost feels a violation to gloss over it. But thank you very much for that, Thandiwe. I really appreciate you sharing in that way. Andrew, over to you. I'm going to put on Yasmin's first slide because it says heritage and identity, but you can take it from there. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Thanks, Anne. Good afternoon, colleagues, and thanks for joining us for this conversation on heritage and identity. Let me, by way of introduction, say that I am a Karoo boy. I grew up in the Karoo, in the middle of the Great Karoo, probably the most ancient land of South Africa. Because if you were to look at the landscape and the mountains, you will know the ancient geologic kind of activity that took place there, creating these beautiful mountains and open, vast plains in the Karoo. And the reason why I speak about the Karoo is because it's also the land which is this interplay of, which is very much tied up with my heritage and identity, of the Khoisan people moving from the west of South Africa towards the east and meeting some of the Bantu-speaking people, the Xhosas. Hence, my own particular tradition and heritage is a mixture of that. And as you know, when we talk about colored people in South Africa, it is this vast mix of people from all over that had created almost this new identity and of people in South Africa. And out of which also were created a whole cultural tradition of these people. I mean, and I'll speak to that in a moment, of some of the things that emerge out of it. But just in terms of that identity going back to ancient times with the Khoisan people, I just want to speak about them first because they are so important in that kind of mixture of what South Africa is at the moment, at least for very much the colored people. Just as a matter of interest, the clicks, for example, in Xhosa actually comes from the Khoisan language. And it's again, you know, that kind of interaction that took place there between these peoples that created such a new and very interesting kind of language. The Khoisan people, quite interestingly, were very much based in that basin where you have kind of in the middle of the Northern Cape, where Sutherland forms kind of the center of it. And then you stretch all the way up to Uppington, Springbok, to the east, maybe towards Kimberley, and so on to the south, Clanwilliam. That is the area where the Khoisan people were kind of rooted very much. And quite interestingly, the reason why I wanted to tell you that is recently I read a very interesting book about that very space that I've just indicated to you. It's also the space where the big telescope, the SKA telescope, which is a combination of that with some telescopes in Australia, to create the square kilometer of a view of looking very deep into the universe. And it is very much rooted there. Now, why that is interesting for me is that the book speaks of, they were seeing, if you are talking about the Khoisan people, the original name were the Tam Dao people. And when they speak about the cosmos, they speak about it as Tam. And it's quite interesting how these two things were by these ancient people held together, of looking at the world, both in terms of what lies underground, where they see themselves in the middle and looking towards the sky, and the spiritual things. On the one side is the camp, on the other side is the hunting ground. In the middle was the waterhole where they interacted with the animals. This was such an interesting, I'd like to share it with you because it's such an interesting part of my heritage. And now you see this modern telescope sitting in that space, which has become like the astronomy heritage of South Africa, because you find these massive telescopes in that particular space. So that's about a little bit about the Khoi people and their interaction. Lots was said about the interaction with the foreign people as they came into South Africa and so forth. And as I said, a lot of my heritage sits also within the Xhosa tradition. And on the other hand, because of my surname, unless my parents or my great-grandparents, who were just slaves, adopted the name, there's also a Johnson here, which I suppose point to the fact that there are people who came over the seas, presumably Britain, and interacted with the local people, hence the Johnson part of it. I don't know enough about it, and so just a matter of interest, soon I want to actually go and do a DNA test to see where the roots actually lie, and especially that which comes outside of Africa and South Africa. So a very interesting kind of history for me. The traditions that then eventually, because of these people coming together, emerging out of it, is very much caught up in traditions like, for example, the Kaapse Klopse. If you go and see the Kaapse Klopse, it just gives you these goosebump feels about a tradition that goes back to the time of the slaves, whereby they celebrated Tweede Nuwe Jaar, which is the second New Year in Cape Town. So on the 2nd of January, it was the Tweede Nuwe Jaar. And the intent of Tweede Nuwe Jaar was very much that the slaves couldn't celebrate New Year's Day because they had to serve the masters. And so on the second day of the year, they were given up, and now this tradition is just kind of kept throughout the many ages in South Africa. The eating traditions, poboti, and pickled fish, and eating pickled fish with hot cross buns on Good Friday is just one of the strangest traditions that I have come across in our community. But it's those kind of things, the way people speak, their incredible sense of humor, and they can laugh about anything. I mean, you could sit in a plane that's about to crash and somebody would say something really funny about that crashing that is going to happen. And so even in the most serious of kind of situations, they would find fun and laughter in that. And so that is very much a little bit of that tradition that I come from. And just the other day, and to talk more about how one see some of this heritage and identity, how does it help us to go into the future? I shared with Anne earlier, but I didn't necessarily want to share it here because you're not supposed to take photographs. I went to a concert that was a symphony jazz concert. And what they literally had on the stage were a symphony orchestra and a jazz band at the same time, and somebody conducting them playing one piece of music. And it was absolutely the most brilliant of infusion. It's not the first time that I've seen it, but I was so struck about it because they call it the Heritage Symphony Jazz Session. What struck me about it was the authenticity of two different traditions in our heritage in South Africa coming together and fusing into one. And you look around you and you see black and white sitting in the audience, and people are just enthralled by this thing happening. For me, that created this kind of deep metaphor of what is possible, of how we celebrate these different things. And when we bring them together, it creates such a beautiful thing that it will last with you forever. I wish I could play the music. I suppose I'm not allowed because it's copyrighted, but I was naughty. I recorded a few clips just to remind me of the beauty of what these guys created. But that for me created the sense of what is authentically possible when we bring these two very different traditions together and let it play. Some years ago, Abdullah Ibrahim played actually with an Afrikaans band called the Plaas Werf Orkest, I think it was called, a similar kind of thing. You bring these two things. And for me, music was kind of the symbol of how we can bring things together. I would leave you with a final thought about it. If we're going to do such authentic kind of bringing together, it would have to be in a way whereby it is really bringing something of yourself into that space. It's not imposing what I have on you, which is very much sometimes how our tradition, unfortunately, has become, where some group's tradition gets suppressed and the other one get elevated. And so the history that we hear about the heritage is always slanted towards that dominant group. And that is not going to be authentic kind of bringing together of our heritage, which is so diverse in South Africa. Last word to say about it is that I believe we have to celebrate those histories very much. But it's also incumbent on us to leave the tribe. And what I mean by that is that you can continue to love your Cook sisters and whatever traditions we have, and eating your millipap and eating your boboti, celebrating your kapsakrops. So we must do that. We must continue to do it. But we also are required to step outside of that to say, if we are going to build a society that is one into South Africa, it's going to be necessary for us to leave some things and take on new things. And how can we find ourselves in this space where we bring it together? It's probably the message for Siopsa too. Where in this do we have to leave the tribe? We have to leave some of those things that is just dominant in our particular culture. And where do we find ourselves beginning to build this new heritage and identity? Because our kids are going to probably have to live with that rather than what we specifically had been brought up with. Just a few thoughts on heritage and identity. Thanks very much, Anne.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I love the metaphor, and I listened to the clip, and it is amazing how these two, what could potentially be dissonant ways of making music or thinking about music, come together to make something that's almost synthesis and antithesis, and then the synthesis, how it creates something so much better and even more, not more beautiful necessarily, but it creates something totally unique. drawing
Absolutely.
on the best of the two musical genres. So thank you so much.
In fact, what the conductor said, just to share there, he spoke us about symphony orchestra is very structured, whereas jazz is very unstructured, because jazz is about improvisation and how you're bringing the structured and unstructured into one space, and you create a totally different and new beauty, other than the beauty that each of them separately create. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the structured and the unstructured, how even with that incredible structure and that complete lack of structure, that somehow you can create a synthesis of both those.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Andrew. I loved listening to that. We're now going to call on Yasmin Abraham to share with us. Yasmin, over to you.
Thank you. You can jump immediately to the next slide.
Okay.
I'll quickly talk through them. Okay, so this topic had me reflecting quite a bit, and I want to share something with you that I've never said out loud. And for those of you who understand what I'm saying, please forgive me for my poor pronunciation. But a favorite saying of mine is Umuntu ngubuntu kabantu. That is something, if my heritage would allow, I would have tattooed on my body. And for those of you who understand why my heritage doesn't allow it, you recognize why there will be no tattoos. But that phrase sticks with me, and it's something that I say in starting this, because I think we all are people through our people, and we are people through our experiences. And it left me reflecting on what exactly is heritage, what is Heritage Day, and what Heritage Day then means to me and for me. So I've put this up. It's just a quick Google definition, and it says that heritage is something that is handed down from the past. And I question, which past? So how far back am I going? It is a tradition. It is national heritage of honor, pride, and courage. That gives me goosebumps personally. And it is something that comes or belongs to one by reason of birth. So you can move to the next slide for me, please. So for me, when I consider the past, I question how far back I'm going. As a South African Indian, I am a third generation South African. That means my great grandfather arrived in India, and I've been told 100 years before I was born, this took place. But if I reflect on that, my heritage and my identity doesn't lie with the people in India. My heritage and my identity lies with the people in South Africa. So when I go back to the past and say, what has the past given me? Then it would be what my parents gave me. I haven't been fortunate enough to live through having grandparents. So I've never had the stories to be told of from the background of a grandparent. And so my heritage in terms of past comes from my parents. Then in terms of national, if you see me in person and if you know me, you will recognize that I always have a South African flag somewhere on my body 90% of the time. And it's important to me that I do. Whenever I leave the country, I make sure I've got my flag on my wrist, because that is my heritage and what's important to me. But something else in terms of national, in terms of pride, that I want to bring forward just as an example is what's currently happening today. As we sit here, William Nicol Road is being changed to Winnie Mandela Road or Drive. And that is something of national pride and national importance that forms part of our heritage and becomes the heritage of our people, which is our future and our children. On the slide, you'll see I've got a book. It's called The Portrait of Indian South Africans. That book is of immense importance to me. And I won't share with you why now. I'll leave that for you to decide at this stage. It's of immense importance. It's a pride in my house. I love that I have this book. Okay, and then I've also got a picture of two of the three very important little people in my life, a picture of my nephew and niece, and that is the clothing that they wore for Heritage Day this year. And that speaks a bit to the reason of my birth. So something that was given to me by birth is religion. And for my sister, it's important that that forms part of the children's heritage. And for me, maybe not as much. I reflect, if I had kids of my own, what would they wear on Heritage Day? And I'm not sure it would be Islamic or something from an Indian background. I'm still thinking on that. There's a picture of food there. It looks a bit like a curry, maybe. I'll talk more to that later as well. And then there's a picture of what's important to me going forward, and that's the diverse heritage that we have going forward. This is a picture of me and friends of mine. And I reflect on where we go from here, looking at that picture. You can continue for me, please, Anne. Okay, so in understanding who I am and what heritage means to me, I also asked other people what heritage means to them, or what Heritage Day specifically means to them. And here are some of the answers that were provided. It's another day where others' cultures are downplayed over other superior cultures. I think Andrew alluded to that a little while ago. Showcasing my lineage, it's the Braais, the Unity, and the public holiday. It's a holiday to celebrate and remember our roots. And then it's by dressing up in our cultural clothes, and you'll see there a white Afrikaans person indicated that that's something that's harder for her to do as a white Afrikaans person. And then we've also got it's a chance to embrace our culture and remember South Africa is a community filled with different people, and Thandi and Andrew both gave us some of that as well. You can continue. Okay, so I'd like you to take just a quick moment, and if you're willing, please drop a comment in the chat box. If you're not willing, just reflect on this. It is Heritage Day. We are celebrating at work. We are organizational psychologists after all. We're celebrating. And I need to know from you, me being Yasmin, what is it that I'm taking to eat for others? What do I wear? What should I be wearing? And what practice or tradition should I be sharing with my colleagues? If you want, please leave a message in the box. If not, think about it and reflect on that for yourself. I'll come back to this in a little bit. Continue. So we've spoken about what Heritage Day means to others. And when I asked them if they look forward to celebrating Heritage Day at work, this is the responses I received. 25% of people look forward to celebrating Heritage Day at work. Significantly, 75% of people, and this is across race groups from a diverse circle, said no, they do not look forward to it. And that's something I think we need to start thinking about if we're talking about going forward. To note, so this was on social media, 72 people looked at my questions or looked at my post, and only 15 people responded. So I'm not sure what that means, if anything, but people who were willing to respond to say yes or no was a very small number of the people who looked at the post. We can move on. Okay, and then in terms of why, what is the why and the why not of whether we look forward to it? So in terms of why, definitely the food, we look forward to the food we can eat, and we look forward to having lovely to see and engage with people and what they are wearing, and it's always very informative. The rest is all no. It doesn't seem authentic. I've heard Andrew mention that word earlier, and workplaces don't know what they mean. It's another platform that gives other cultures higher pedestals than the rest, and it's toxic. My work doesn't do anything, and our team doesn't do anything. So what I took out of all of this when I was reflecting on it was that I think we're so attuned to wanting to share. I need to share who I am. I need to let South Africa know. I need people to know where I come from. And we focused on almost giving that to people. And I wondered to an extent if we need to change our mindset from the sharing, or I have to tell, I have to be, I have to see my roots, towards the learning. So what can I take from others? What can I learn from them? And if I look at the comments of the people who said, yes, I look forward to it, they almost have a bigger mindset of, I want to learn, I want to know more about you. So I'm not imposing or putting my culture and my heritage on you, but I want you to share with me that. I think it's important that we move towards removing hierarchy from our shared experiences. We come from a history of racial hierarchies, and it's become so ingrained in this generation or the older generation that when we share our cultures, we almost have to do it with this force of, I am just as important and I am there. And I recognize that to remove that, we need to put ourselves on that even playing field where one isn't on a pedestal and another isn't. And then I wonder what we need to do to carry it forward as well. I do think we need to recognize what heritage means for ourselves, whether it's the 4 generations ago past or the current past, but own that, because that's what you would share. So if we can move on again to the next slide. So what do I do for Heritage Day? I wear skulls, I wear jeans, and I wear a wardrobe of black, because I do not identify with traditional Indian clothing. I eat AK-47s, I eat booba, I eat cook sisters, I eat China fruit, and I eat shoria. I also eat a baboti. If I go back to the past of 4 generations ago, I eat haldoni and curry khichdi. My home language is English, but I also speak Afrikaans and grew up on a beautiful Kombuis Afrikaans that combines Malay and Arabic words into the language. My tribal language is Cockney. I come from a fishing village 4 generations ago called Zui in the middle of India. In terms of the book I showed you earlier, it is not of immense importance to me because it carries my South African heritage. It's of immense importance to me because it is a first edition signed copy of the book by Fatima Mir, who was part of a South African struggle history. That's where the importance lies for me. And I think it's important for me to say that because we easily look at people. We look at the duk that they wear, we look at how they present themselves, we look at the tribe that they come from, and we decide, but we don't ask. And for me, that is the way forward, to learn more and to speak to what it is of other people. Okay, we can continue. Okay, so just a quick note. I spoke to our generation, or the working generation, in response to asking the kids what Heritage Day means to them. One of the responses was, "What's that?" And you can see how his mom reacted to that response below, where she says she's failed as a Black South African mom, and she really doesn't, she's put him in African print clothing, but she must have failed somewhere. My niece is 6 years old, and we had a lovely conversation on Friday, and you saw her in the picture earlier. She didn't know what she was wearing. She doesn't know. What I found out on Friday is my niece doesn't know that she's Indian. And to a degree, my niece thinks I might be Zulu because of my wearing of beads. She spoke to me about the girls in her class who are Zulu wearing their traditional outfits. And then I asked her, "So am I Zulu?" And she's like, "Yeah, maybe you are," because I wear Zulu traditional clothing at times in terms of beads. And to an extent, I took a step back when I needed to explain to her heritage. And it goes back to the superiority of race again, where I wondered if I should tell her that she's Indian. But I recognize that that part of her heritage shouldn't be lost. And we need to be able to tell her, this is where you come from, to remove any forms of superiority or inferiority. So going forward, I think it's our children we need to think of. And then, yeah, next slide. So in the spirit of learning, I have said many words today, whether it's the name William Nicol, or Haldoni and curry khichdi, or choria, or booba, or sisters, or Afrikaans. I've said many things. And in the spirit of learning, I haven't explained those things purposefully. Because I think as much as I've said some things, that words that you don't know, Tandy might have shared something with us as well, and Andrea, who might have shared something with us as well. And I want us to take that forward going forward, to see what I can learn. I will be Googling things, and I hope you would do the same. Or in the spirit of dialogue, I hope that you would be willing to ask me questions, and I would gladly share the answers with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Yasmin. I was very interested to see how you were going to tackle this particular talk, because I know you have a very unique way of approaching your identity and making sense of perhaps your heritage. So thanks very much for sharing that. I really enjoyed what you have to share with us. I have a few minutes to quickly wrap up, and we'll see, maybe we'll still have time for a chat question, or a question and discussion time. And in some way, it's a bit difficult for me to tackle this, because I am the culture who is dominated. I represent the culture who has normalized what is considered to be culture, and has defined and defined what is in and what is out in respect of culture. And I'm very aware of that. So when I speak, I bear that in mind. I am an English South African, and I've often struggled when people ask me, what is your culture? Because it's difficult to define it. And I think there are probably two reasons for it. The first is precisely for that reason I mentioned, is that because my culture is perhaps being normalized as the dominant culture, it's not always easy to recognize, because if we think of culture, it is the way we do things around here. And because things are always done my way, perhaps I don't always recognize when my culture is actually at play. But I think there's another reason for that as well. And I think that is because English South Africans are sort of a little bit of a mixed bag of people, and everybody who comes from anywhere else and is sort of not Afrikaans sort of speaks English. And so we sort of have a mixed bag of various European and other origins, each with their own cultural traditions and heritage. So for myself, I am a mixed bag of French and British, with a little bit of German thrown in. And if you look in the picture to the right there, you'll see Daniel Hugo, 1688. And that is when those are my deepest roots in the country. My forefather, Daniel Hugo, arrived in 1688. Now, he was originally from the Champagne region in France, but he actually fled to Amsterdam 3 years before he came to the Cape to avoid the Catholic persecution of the Protestant. And the story is that he actually escaped France in a box of books. Otherwise, he would have been killed. Now, in reflecting where I went with today's session, it was a bit difficult precisely because I feel in many ways this vague sense of culture and what it is and what it means. And to a large extent, it is my history that dominated textbooks for many years. So perhaps there's a little less to learn regarding my own history than there is from many of the other groups represented here today. But when thinking on what to speak about, I thought about my French heritage, and probably because that's the one I know the most about. That's the one that has been documented the most. And there are three concepts that I think come from the French and that they're passionate about, which I think we can use to build one psyopsa, I belong. And those are the idea of fraternity, the idea of food, and the idea of fashion. And please, for one moment, do not think I'm suggesting we build psyopsa around French food or French fashion. That's precisely not where I'm going with this. But it is rather the idea of what are the kinds of things we have to take on? What are the areas that we have to take on and deconstruct and rethink in terms of building a one psyopsa? And that's what I mean by the spirit, not the form. And in choosing these, I thought about them first, and then when I reflected on them, they all come through in terms of research that I've done in terms of Black professionals specifically joining professions, not only psychology and industrial psychology, but other professions in our country as well. These are not the only areas, but these are some of the areas that they find particularly difficult and which reinforce their sense of exclusion and lack of belonging. So I'll just touch briefly on each of them. The first one is fraternity. Now, fraternity was one of the cries of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity. And fraternity refers to the idea of a close friendship. And professionals are often considered to be a fraternity. But I think fraternity is important for me because fraternity goes beyond just a sort of superficial idea or superficial network of colleagues or a spirit of collegiality. And fraternity speaks to me of developing deep friendships with people in the profession. And Andrew mentioned leaving the tribe. And I think in all of these areas, we need to leave the tribe. But I think probably most importantly, in terms of the idea of fraternity. And I would really challenge us all to put high on our list of priorities, developing friendships with people outside our tribes, getting to know people and where they come from, getting to understand a little bit about their history, just as we have done today, so that we develop genuine friendships within our profession. The second one is food. And the French are passionate about their food. And as I said, I'm not suggesting we build SARPs around French food, but I think it's an area we have to think about in terms of belonging. And when we host events, when we decide on menus, when we decide what kind of food is going to be shared, we need to be more aware of the diversity. And rather than sort of defaulting to the normal kinds of foods that we always sort of serve, that always get served at cocktails, at parties, very often organizational events, we need to be more cognizant that food is an enormous reflection of our culture. It's a reflection of our identity. And we have to be more sensitive in the way we think about food and be more inclusive in its use and celebration. And then my last point then is the idea of fashion. And the way we dress, it says a lot about our identity. Tandiwe spoke a lot about identity and clothes, the way we dress. Clothes do something. They're a very performative part of our identity. It's that part of identity that in terms of physical artifacts that we can perform an element of who we are. And if we think about the history of a profession, and this is gendered as well, that in the past, those people who developed the professions were generally male and they were European. So the norms around clothing have become an integral part of the profession. And so we have certain ideas about what is professional and what is not. And that includes standards around hair and things like that. And I think it's really important that in our own minds and in the way we, in our workplaces, that we think about what constitutes professionalism and to what extent clothing actually has anything to do with the way I perform professionalism. And so these are just some ideas, some areas that I think taking the passion that my forefathers had for these things, and I don't think the French necessarily are the most inclusive nation, and I'm not suggesting that for a moment, but that we take their passion for these kind of things, for the food, for the friendship, for the fashion, and we look, how do we build an inclusive society, but using these specific elements that we have at our disposal. Thank you very much. That is me. I see we are at 2 o'clock. Marissa, do we have time for 1 or 2 questions? Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Anne. You can proceed.
Okay. So are there any comments that people have, comments or questions that people have? Any comments from our speakers?
Maybe in terms of a comment that was put in the chat box as to how do we
Thanks.
contextualize heritage of an organization? How does one integrate? I think if there's going to be a true sense of belonging, then there must first of all be an acceptance that there is no one dominant culture in the organization. And there's to be an acceptance to say it's a fusion of different cultures that are happening here. And we've talked about this big challenge where you have to make a real concerted effort and decision about, do we truly want to have a diverse culture? And what are the implications? Do we understand what are the implications of it? Because one of it is going to say, how tolerant are you going to be for diversity in all its different expressions? You can't just choose one. You'll have to say all of these things are important. And I think the list is already there, by the way, whereby people have experienced some sense of discrimination, whether it is race, gender, religion, all of those things. There's a whole long list of it already. And how tolerant are we going to be to create this fusion of the best of all of these beginning to find expression in the organization? I think that is probably going to be the big challenge of building truly an integrated kind of organizational culture.
Thank you, Andrew. And I think
just to add on that, and Andrew, for me, I think, and I'm talking purely from my own observation, not only of SIOPSA, just organizations within the South African context in general. I think much as we all talk and realize the importance of inclusivity and the importance of full representation and nurturing our diversity, I think to a very large extent, the talk ends with people talking about it, but basically when we have to genuinely engage, start normalizing certain dialogues, not shy away from them. That is still a big question for me, because yes, we want to do it, but I think generally, and I'm also including SIOPSA as well here, we still shy away from just normalizing. Let it be normal. Let it not be looked at as something almost odd, to start engaging, start questioning, start asking, start learning in an inclusive, in a genuine way, about ourselves and about our backgrounds and about the culture and the legacy that we want to see SIOPSA create and live for generations that to come. For me, let's normalize talking. Let's normalize our dialogue. Let it not be something that's shied away or somehow treated superficially as if it's happening when it's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Tandiwe and Andrew. And I think, Andrew, the metaphor of that symphony and the jazz band is very, very instructive. Because if you go and look at music as an art, it also is incredibly disciplined. And to create something like that must have taken hours and hours and hours of practice. It wasn't just a case of, okay, well, the symphony orchestra sat down and the jazz band sat down and they sort of just started. That would have been the jazz, but not the symphony. And to create something that beautiful must have taken hours and hours of work and then hours and hours of practice to get it right, to get it sounding like that. And I think, Tandi, that speaks to what you were saying, is that we often shy away from it. It's because it's hard work, but it's something that we almost have to sort of reckon with, in the sense, and say, this is hard work. It is going to take a huge amount of effort, but it's something that we just have to start doing. Yes. Otherwise, we're never, ever going to get anywhere, because it's not just going to happen. It's going to take a deliberate and concerted effort from all of us to achieve it.
True.
Any last questions or comments from anyone?
I wonder whether we could play that clip and just a bit, not necessarily show the peak, but for people to hear this combination of jazz and symphony. I'm not sure whether it will play. Try and hear whether it's playing. Did you hear that?
Yes, it is playing. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, okay. Apologies. I thought that's such a beautiful piece myself.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Andrew. And I think we must keep it in our minds as a metaphor. I think that's a very, very important metaphor that we can, because I have a great belief in metaphors. I think our minds work in metaphors, and I think they're very valuable in helping us think about how we can move and sort of evoke meanings for people around what we want to achieve. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you all for this session, useful and very instructive about just the variety and the richness of our heritage as South Africans.
Yes. Thandiwe, a last word from you.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you for the session. And yes, Thandiwe had to introduce herself in a way that was probably a bit of unexpected from the rest of my colleagues. But yes, for me personally, my identity speaks to how I get to introduce myself, how I get to be remembered, how I get to feel the pride in me. And I thought this is going to be something unexpected for my colleagues, but for once, can I not say, hi, I'm Thandiwe Gama? Can I say it in my African way? And can I say it using my clan names so that my colleagues know exactly who Thandiwe is? But I thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you for the richness of the discussions. Also from Yasmin, quite interesting, and as well as Dr. Andrew. Thank you so much, guys. Let's do this more often.
Thanks so much, Thandiwe. Definitely. I think this is the start of many of these sessions. I think I would say Yasmin, but I think she had to hop off. She had other commitments. But I just want to thank the speakers for sharing something of your history. I really enjoyed listening. And I just want to thank everyone who attended. We were afraid because it was such a last minute event that we wouldn't have anybody, but we really appreciate your attendance. We loved having you. And here's to many more of these kinds of sessions. Enjoy the rest of your week, everybody.